million viewers to BBC One on Monday nights. And over the course of 6 weeks, X-Cars followed officers of the Tactical Vehicle Crime Unit of Greater Manchester Police in their undercover fight against car crime. In a moment, we'll be putting some of the criticisms raised by the series to the BBC. But first, Adrian Mills reports.
Set on the streets of Manchester, some of the people who live there became key players in X-Cars. But when people become part of the action, the experience can have a greater impact than a brush with the police that isn't caught on camera. X-Cars has raised concerns from both viewers and some of those featured in the series about individual privacy and what safeguards should exist for people identified in the programmes. Leaverdale Road.
For a few minutes entertainment, I don't think the BBC thought it out well. They were very insensitive for people's feelings. You know, it has a lasting effect on people's lives.
Strike. Let's go. Strike.
Hands up, conceal. Hands up.
The BBC feel that, all right, we've got 12 million people watching it. Let's keep going with the same format. But the same format could be destroying people's lives and people's livelihoods.
During one episode of the programme, Billy Taylor, who runs his own building company in Manchester, was followed by officers who received a tip-off he was driving a stolen van. When he was stopped, the television cameras were there as well as the police.
And I don't want this on television. Because when you're going to look at television, there's a criminal now, we're using it.
No, they're saying that you're a person that's driving a possibly stolen van.
Here, details of Billy Taylor's business name and telephone number have been blanked out. On X-Cars, they were clearly shown. After he was stopped, Mr. Taylor then went to the police station to be interviewed. When he got there, he was filmed again. 8 minutes of his story unfolded before viewers were specifically told that no charges were brought against him.
I'd like to tell you at first that you're not under arrest, OK? You're free to leave this police station at any time.
They're encroaching on my privacy. As far as I'm concerned, they're making me look out that I'm a guilty person before I'm even found guilty or innocent or what. I asked them over and over again, please don't televise me. And I put my hand up to the cameras. I was panicking a bit because the cameras was on me. To be honest, I was a bit naive. If it had been now, I would have asked for a solicitor to be there and I would have refused to be interviewed. But the way that it was made out to be, that I had to be interviewed, and I had to be interviewed in front of the BBC cameras.
Well, there was a sequence of events where Mr. Taylor asked the cameraman to stop filming while he was talking to the police. And the next shot we saw was of his white van with his name, his telephone number, and his occupation on the van. And they held it on there for so long, I could write it down. I found that incredible.
Give me, mate. Got me? Yeah.
But the case of Billy Taylor was not the only one to cause concern among viewers.
Because it's nicked. You sure? When did you buy it?
Ages ago.
How long's ages ago?
Want it at the minute.
Another programme in the series showed the same officers stopping a car with 4 young men in it. Some viewers didn't understand why the programme makers had chosen to blank out the 2 white faces, but not those of the 2 young black men. Here, we've disguised all their faces.
You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you don't mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything that you do say can be given in evidence. Do you understand what I'm saying to you now? He's like, Shelley, please. Hey,
viewers were also concerned about the possible effects on the family of one of the young black men. They felt it insensitive to include his case when the audience were later told that he was sent straight to prison, where, awaiting trial for serious offences, he was taken ill, rushed to hospital, where he died. On X-Cars, his face, his name and his grandparents' address were all revealed.
My heart goes out to the parents and the families of that young man. I really feel that they were very insensitive, unfeeling in showing it, because that's the last thing you would have seen of this young man. They had no right at all to actually show faces and names. That, to me, It's, you know, what type of information do we need that information? We, the normal public sitting down watching that, we don't need that information. The policers are the people that need that information. We don't need that at all. So why should their families suffer?
Turn left there, and at the junction at the end of that, you'll see the back centre, and it's in the back centre. Okay?
1982, and the Thames Valley Police in action. This documentary series about their work, called Police, had a great impact and helped change police procedure. It was made by filmmaker Roger Grafe. He thinks X-Cars was deftly put together, but he echoes some of the viewers' concerns about the programme maker's relationship with some of those featured.
What worries me about the X-Cars, use of bystanders or people that have been arrested or significant adults for children, is that they don't seem to be sensitive to the fact that there's going to be a huge impact on the people involved the next day. And after all, what we do is only television. It's their lives that are at stake. We can't throw people to the lions. It's not like sort of Roman circuses where anybody you happen to catch on camera is fair game. It's just not true, especially if their reputation is at stake.
The producers have not really thought about it clearly, and I'm hoping that by actually having a programme like this, with us talking about it, that they will view things differently and actually think about what they're doing and see things in a different light.
Well, James Hayes, producer of X-Cars, joins us now, along with one of the BBC's senior documentary producers, Polly Bide, who is not herself involved in this series, but has had wide experience of documentary filmmaking. So, James Hayes, first of all, should you not have disguised Mr. Taylor, or at least disguised details of his business and telephone number?
Well, I think the film that Biteback have just shown us is a very selective and very one-sided film, and if I'd made that film, I'd be worried sitting here. However, that's not the kind of film I've made. At every stage in every programme in that series, we were sensitive to what would happen. We referred upwards through the organisation at every level, and we're not insensitive, and I just didn't recognise the series from that film. I took the decision, nobody else, to include the piece where Mr. Taylor pointed at the camera and said, "I'm objecting to being on television because they're going to make me into a criminal." It would have been far easier for me, and nobody would have ever known, to exclude that sequence from the programme. I felt it important because it reflected Mr. Taylor's attitude on the street. However, immediately after that sequence, I stopped filming and had a detailed discussion with Mr. Taylor about who I was, what we were doing, what we were trying to do, and that at the moment, all I knew was that the police were saying he may be driving in a possibly stolen van. Following a discussion, Mr. Taylor and I talked about whether or not he wanted to portray his side of the story. He took that opportunity and, in fact, gave me permission. Otherwise, of course, we're guarded by really strict guidelines within the BBC. I cannot film anybody without their consent, and I'm afraid that's the bottom line we've worked to.
Mr. Taylor, what do you think of that response?
You spoke to me. The only person that spoke to me was a police officer. But what annoys me is you've not shown all what I've said. When I was pleading, other than getting on my hands and knees, saying, please don't show this on television, don't show my van.
All right, well, OK, let's look at the question of the telephone number on the van. Should you not have blocked that out, knowing that certain people are going to watch the television, they're going to say, oh, let's phone Mr. Taylor for a laugh and say we've just seen him, affect his business that way?
If I thought I was invading privacy, then I would, but that particular phone number is... Sorry.
Why leave
shall I answer?
Hold on a wee second, because let's finish the point and then we'll come back, OK?
That phone number is advertised openly every day all over Manchester. By
people
definition,
don't necessarily put a face to the telephone number, do they? And now they will.
Fair enough, but where's the question of privacy? It's in the public domain. Every day, by definition, it's advertised on the outside of the van.
OK, all right, let's take some views from the audience, because I know that it's not just simply Mr. Taylor who's been affected by this. John Tubby.
Yeah, I was quite concerned. I never complained about a TV programme before, and I rang in because I thought it can't be a real person, it must be an actor, but the acting seemed to be too good, so it must be the real person. And I just wondered, you know, what makes you think that you've got the right to put this man's face across the TV screens, virtually every household, and ruin his life?
Can I answer that?
What makes, and could you answer the first question first? You were asked whether you'd made a mistake.
He thinks he hasn't made a mistake.
You say you know, you haven't made a mistake.
So we're going to answer the second point now.
The whole remit of X-Cars was to follow the police as they investigate car crime. Last year in Britain, or in England and Wales, there was 1.5 million car-related crimes. That means, by definition, again, there's 1.5 million victims of car crime. That was the remit for the series. We know it's difficult material to cover, but we are guided by strict guidelines. I could not have, again, filmed in the interview with Mr. Taylor at the police station without having Mr. Taylor's permission.
There are a number of other people in the audience as well who have phoned the BBC and were concerned about the programme. One of them, Duncan Barton, here.
Yes, I phoned the BBC, that's right. Very much a spur-of-the-moment thing, but it seemed to me that Mr. Taylor's privacy was clearly being invaded because I heard him on camera saying, I don't want this stuck in my face while I'm having a brush with the law. We saw him innocently driving his van along, pulled over by 2 plainclothes policemen, and given a fairly rough ride in public. He wasn't inviting that. He wasn't recklessly driving his car in the streets of Manchester in the middle of the night. He was going about his daily business.
James?
I don't have, much disagreement with that, but unbeknown to him at that time, he was in fact driving a stolen car. And what attracted the police to him was that, in fact, the car or the van had been stolen. And that's really the bottom line about that story. There's a greater public interest to this that, in Manchester alone, every week there's 800 to 900 cars stolen. It's a nationwide problem. That means for every car stolen, there's a victim. This van had been stolen. Obviously, Mr. Taylor didn't know about it, but it had been stolen from somebody. And there's a greater public interest in this debate.
All right, OK, well, let's turn to the second point of interest in the film, which was one that Jacqueline Kerr, in fact, raised. And it's about how you handle the 4 young men. Why were the faces of the young white men changed and the faces of the young black men weren't?
OK. In that particular story, there was 4 men in a car, and it was stopped. In the final film, the way I made it, because what we're talking about is making open and honest documentaries about the work of the police, we came across... Sorry, let me finish. We came across 4 men, and the way I made the film, and the way the film sat on the shelf up to the week of transmission was all 4 faces were seen, which is the way you always want to do it. For legal reasons, I was made to blob the faces of 2 of the men. They happened to be white. I would have been in contempt of court not to have done that. I was made to do that for legal reasons.
OK, but there were sensitivities here on the race issue. Jacqueline?
Can I just say to you, I really feel that you should have blanked all their faces. There was no need to blank just 2, because racially it was very unbalanced and it was very biased. We're living in a very sensitive time now, and I think the way this programme was portrayed, it was very racial.
I was just absolutely appalled watching it, to show 2 white faces blanked and the 2 black fellas' faces not. And the attitude was just totally wrong.
There was absolutely no question of us blobbing 2 white faces because they were white and not blobbing 2 faces because they were black.
I want to put to Polly Bide about the legal niceties overriding the racial consideration.
I think the decision was made here, and as you know, that wasn't something that I was party to, but the decision was made here that those faces were the ones that would be disguised. I think there was an attempt to go out with the police and to show that not everybody they picked up was guilty, that they weren't, that there wasn't a sort of sense in which, the entire series was sanitizing their work and suggesting that they were always successful in their outcomes. Now, I think these are they are very difficult issues. They're ones that we debate within the department and we argue about and discuss all the time. They're not, they're not simple issues. The BBC has felt that this series should be made. I think, by and large, the British public have agreed with them. I think there has been criticism of it. It's not as if we're not listening to the criticism. We are listening to it.
But for some reason you choose to humiliate people who were innocent, and you choose to protect the ones who were guilty. Yes. So for me it doesn't really make any sense, and that's what I would like you to explain to me, please.
Sure Isn't that the problem, that is how it is seen?
Almost every day, certainly 2 or 3 times a week, I referred upwards because of the very nature of the stuff we're trying to film. And it is difficult, it is sensitive, and we don't go willy-nilly flying around with cameras thinking that we have the right to film everything. I filmed nobody in that series that didn't invite me in to film or give me the permission to film. Absolutely nobody.
Oh, I don't know, I can sleep.
In the case of Mr. Taylor, all I can say again is I included the sequence in the film where he said he'd prefer not to be filmed, and I stopped filming and then had a discussion. I could not have stopped or started filming again, sorry, at the police station if I had not got that permission.
Given the audience reaction that you've heard today, are you actually surprised by what you've heard? And does it make you think again?
I know, we knew before we began the series that we would be dealing with very sensitive material and very sensitive areas. All I can say again is that every single stage we referred upwards when we were in doubt. We sought legal guidance and we sought editorial guidance from senior management at the BBC. The remit for this series, and the vast majority of the 12 million people didn't have a problem with it, was to have an honest look at car crime, by far the most widespread crime in Britain.
We stand here as programme makers to be judged, you know, and that is why we're here this evening. We don't, you know, we have to stand by our judgment. There is no other golden rule. There are guidelines for us, but they're guidelines to be interpreted.
James Hayes, Pauline Bide, thank you both very much indeed. And now the hit list and some of the other programmes which have fallen foul of viewers this month. This month, Watchdog, the BBC's leading consumer affairs programme, scored an own goal when it criticised British Gas for not answering its customer service line.
It's not a very good start. Lines are busy.
A number of viewers thought the programme should look a little closer to home before passing judgment after they tried to make contact with Watchdog's hotline.
And the programme you can ring free of charge now live in the studio. Here's the number.
As David McGowan from Moulton-on-Thames argued, what's the point of inviting viewers to phone in when they haven't got enough people to answer the phone? Watchdog should get its own house in order.
We got the direct line to editor Steve Anderson. He apologises to anyone who's had trouble getting through, but he said there's more strain on the system now because we have 8 million viewers and they can all telephone Watchdog for free. None of the gas, water and electricity companies offer customers a free call, and they provide essential services.
Every Saturday, the National Lottery says it could be you. But for some viewers, it certainly shouldn't be Bob Monkhouse.
A survey this week shows that most wives don't mind making love with the dog in the bedroom. Well, our dog does that, you know. He watches me to learn how to beg.
David Eccles from Dorking called the Biteback hotline to protest that Bob Monkhouse is the wrong person for the job. His sleazy comments and innuendos, he told us, aren't suitable for a family programme, and he's getting worse. Why allow him to carry on?
Producer Peter Estell told Biteback that everyone has their own view as to who should present the lottery. But he said, Bob Monkhouse is an established comedian, and his style of humour is part of a long tradition going back to the music halls.
Great Railway Journeys is not only for train spotters. Each week, different presenters have jumped aboard a train to mock or marvel at the places they visit. But some viewers were left steaming at comments made by Alexei Sayle when he travelled through Syria and Jordan.
To us, Arabs are either terrorists, kidnappers, or people trying to flog your stuffed camel.
Alan Hallibard in London told us, I didn't expect a presenter making a blatant one-sided political statement which had nothing to do with the journey. Alexei Sayle was not fair or funny.
We tracked down the executive producer, David Taylor, who told us, as a pro-Arab Jew, Alexei Sayle is hardly one-sided about the Middle East. Indeed, he's a split personality. An intrepid train traveller who hates the discomfort of the Syrian railways.
And now political reporting. Just this week, as Parliament began its new session, Tony Hall, Chief Executive of BBC News, told a conference that viewers are turned off politics because of the soundbite culture. But are journalists partly to blame? Some people certainly think so. Anyway, among those viewers not yet turned off, there are still other worries about the BBC's political reporting. Interviewing, is it too aggressive or not probing enough? Westminster, does it unfairly dominate the news agenda? And spin doctors, are they succeeding in softening up the BBC? All that in just a moment. But first, Adrian Mills examines a recent week in political broadcasting, the week of the Conservative Party conference.
At the heart of recent criticisms about political reporting is the relationship between journalists and politicians who inhabit the world around Westminster. For some viewers, it's a question of journalists' interviewing style getting in the way of a proper analysis of political issues.
The journalist is all too often, he's more interested in the gladiatorial combat
with a politician than he is in presenting a sober, balanced version of the truth of what the politician is saying.
The BBC's weekly political show, On the Record, would like to think it aims to get at that truth. Presented by John Humphreys, it offers viewers in-depth interviews with politicians, so inevitably its interviewing style comes under close scrutiny.
The big thing is how much sleaze we're going to do. I think if we structured around trust across the board. Yeah.
On the weekend before the Conservative Party conference in Bournemouth, On the Record was busy preparing to grill the party chairman, Brian Mawhinney.
I'll tell you what good politics are. Good politics are seen to be working in the national interest. That's what good politics
John Humphreys has taken plenty of flack for his approach in interviews, but he doesn't think it's too gladiatorial.
I don't think it's part of my job constantly to interrupt or to be overbearing or to be rude, but I do think it's part of my job to be persistent. And if the politician does not answer the question, quite deliberately sets out not to answer the question, I have to point that out to the audience. And I point it out by asking it over and over again. And you still, if I may say so, have not answered the question of whether, in your view, it is proper for a government whip to talk to a chairman of an investigating committee. And that is a crucial question, isn't it?
John,
about the matters involving the committee.
John, let me make it clear. Whips talk to members of Parliament all the time.
I understand that.
About a whole...
For John Humphreys, there's no question of being softened up by political pressure.
It is our job to keep our nerve and to say, fine, I hear what you're saying, but we're going to do what we think is right and what we think is fair.
Fighting talk, but it's not just how politicians are dealt with, but who is setting the news agenda, which concerns some viewers.
The building behind me is not the story. Of course, the people in it have a very strong vested interest to maintain this place as the centre of the news agenda. It actually isn't. The news agenda is happening in Middlesbrough, in Bristol, in Carlisle, in Portsmouth, in Tottenham, in Southwark, and so on. That's where the softening up happens. The audience is persuaded that what this bunch of people want to say is the news. It ain't.
In the BBC's newsroom, they reckon they're addressing that charge.
Okay. Is that how you want to do it, TX?
Making political coverage palatable to the majority of viewers is a daily challenge.
We know that the audience find a lot of politics pretty alienating, particularly internal party spats. So what we're trying to do is to make the links between politics as it goes on at Westminster and policy and its implications in the real world, in the world of our viewers. So we're trying to follow a sort of basic rule that wherever possible, a political report should start in the real world, should have filming away from Westminster.
And then there's always the problem of too much politics. On Friday morning, as the Conservative Party conference was drawing to a close, the 1 o'clock news team was faced with difficult choices about just what should go into their bulletin.
Michael Heseltine, Michael Howard, Ian Lang, Douglas Hogg, John Gummer, William Watergrave.
While the keynote speech by Prime Minister John Major would make the lead item, there was still a question of whether they should end the bulletin with another analytical piece to put the party conference season into context.
To do that, I'm going to have to drop one or two really quite jolly stories, particularly a story about time travel, a scientist at Sussex University who thinks that it is possible. I think I'm actually going to stick with my instincts and have the second bit of politics from Bournemouth, because I think it is important to get away from the immediate emotional excitement of today's speech and look back over the party conferences as a whole. But it's a problem. The viewers may well prefer the time travel.
3, 2, 1, 0.
For the viewers who were happy to see political context win out over time travel, there's another problem. Whether or not the coverage succeeds in getting down to the nitty-gritty of policy rather than being sidetracked by political manoeuvring.
And we're coming up to a general election. There are questions that the public want answered by the politicians. We want the actual facts out of the government. We don't want the spin from the politicians' aides. I think that's what the journalists are falling down, the BBC's falling down. It's not tackling the issues.
3, 2, 1.
And mix. Here we go.
On Newsnight, they claim this task is getting harder. Trying to analyse policy issues often involves looking at internal debate within political parties. But they say that has brought increasing pressure from spin doctors, trying to control how Newsnight covers certain stories.
Both the Conservative and Labour parties are very anxious to present a united front, particularly over things like Europe. So we've got the problem of the frustration of knowing what people are really saying privately, but not saying it publicly on camera. And it's our job to try and get them to say those things publicly, or if not, explain through our political correspondent what's going on.
Yeah, I like your idea of no gamble, don't you? Well, Labour holding back from any kind of gamble.
And then you have an extra line saying...
Veteran political reporter and Newsnight presenter Peter Snow says the pressure is getting more heavy-handed.
Very difficult people to speak out of turn. As the election gets closer and closer, even more difficult. So our job becomes even more difficult then because, in a sense, it's a worry about free speech. Occasionally, they will say, OK, well, you can have an interview with so-and-so, provided you treat that subject a little more gently or something like that, you see. Now, that is simply unacceptable pressure, and we have had that kind of pressure from parties. And that one has to resist and say, no, it's not on. The problem is, of course, that they know we want the interview with the leader or the minister or the shadow minister that we're after, and so they will try and use that carrot. We'll give you the interview, all right, provided you behave this way. Can't have that.
So, will the BBC manage to resist these pressures to the viewers' satisfaction? As election fever mounts, it could be an exacting few months for BBC political reporting.
Well, the BBC's political editor, Robin Oakley, is here, and John Barton is here too, editor of both the 1 o'clock and 6 o'clock news, and a former deputy editor of Newsnight. Well, Robin Oakley, do you think Peter Snow is protesting too much and the BBC can put up perfectly well with spin doctors and all their pressure?
Well, I think we've always had spin doctors, probably since medieval times, when the first courtier plucked the sleeve of the chap who wrote the ballads about what was going on in those times. We don't take what a spin doctor says and immediately scribble that down in a notebook and spout it out on the air and say that's gospel, that's the way it